You all know Bobby Fischer, and you might even also know that his favourite opening with the black pieces was the King's Indian defence. It's a dynamic attacking response to d4. If white decides to close the centre, the consequences could be dire, with one misstep leading to him getting checkmated. So here we go, Robert James Fischer versus Victor Korchnoi. He begins with d4, Fischer just responds with knight to f6. I also in this analysis, I have Fischer's own analysis from the game, and some more context. This was played in a blitz event, so it's obviously going to be slightly less accurate play than usual. This is still a very accurate and exciting game. So this is our standard King's Indian stuff. Korchnoi going for the main line, with bishop to e2, castles, knight to f3, and basically trying to start something on the king side. So Fischer offers up his knight to get hit, he rotates it into e2, but the idea of this is to close the centre, and then black just begin a monstrous kingside attack. So knight d2, which Fischer notes that this was considered the best move by the Russians. He continues with c5, completing the closure of the centre, and obviously here you can take en passant, but after captures, white basically has no advantage. There's no outpost on d5, and it's going to be much harder to get your queenside play started. Of course, Korchnoi did not go for that. He goes a3, just trying to get something started on the queen side. So with this centre, white can't really get anything started on the king side. That's black's job. Black's basically going to be trying to checkmate white, and white is trying to break through on the queen side. So we see knight to e8 by Fischer, just rerouting that piece and freeing up Freddie the f-pawn for duty. He's basically just going to march this as far down the board as he can, just to seal up the centre completely and just begin a monstrous attack with a pawn storm, bringing every piece of the party against the white king. So Korchnoi continues, b4, then we see b6 by Fischer, just wants to stifle any counterplay white has on the queen side, and he's going to have a free hand to attack on the king side. So rook to b1, preparing to capture or maybe even push, and then we see f5, the idea behind white's setup. Fischer himself notes that having made all the necessary precautions towards the queen side, black is now ready to attack on the king's flank. So we see f3 by Korchnoi, just trying to gum up Fischer's advance, but Fischer doesn't need a second time of asking. He's just going to go f4, clamping down, and now the centre is fully sealed off. It's going to be much harder for white's pieces to get back and defend his own king. So a4, white continues to attack on the other flank. We see g5, Fischer continues to march forward. He can even bring every single one of his pawns. I mean, with the centre this closed, it doesn't even matter that his king's exposed. He's going to be one checkmating white first. So we see a5, trying to again get something started on the queen side, and now rook to f6. This is these days known as a more caveman approach, but you just love to see it from Fischer, very clearly showing his hand, showing his intentions. He just wants to get this rook over to g6 or h6 and get some powerful heavy pieces aiming at that white king. And now b takes e5 by Korchnoi. Fischer himself notes this as quite the inaccuracy, because after he recaptures, it's impossible for Korchnoi to even get anything going on the queen side. And as there's no real play for white on the king side, he's basically just got to shuffle his pieces, sit around, and get attacked for the next 30 moves. So we see knight to b3, rook g6, again, continuing his natural plan, bishop to d2, nothing really doing for white, knight to f6, Fischer bringing his piece into the game. That knight came back, and now it's rotating back into the action. King h1, getting offline this pin, and now g4, Fischer has ready to attack. We see captures back. Of course, you can play a move, like a waiting move, like bishop to e1 or something, but then Fischer is just going to go g3, and you can't even go h3 because a very thematic sacrifice in the King's Indian. You think, this bishop is not developed. Well, yeah, actually it is, because it's only ever going to be seeing this diagonal, and being on c8 is perfectly placed to even sacrifice itself in this variation. That's what can happen. Bishop takes h3, and if you want to recapture, he can push that g-pawn down to g2 with a fork with check against the king and rook. Obviously, you don't want to be allowing any of that. So Korchnoi decides to capture the pawn, and Fischer recaptures with the knight. We see rook to f3 by Korchnoi. Fischer notices an inaccuracy. He thinks the better defense for white, a more tenacious effort, would be bishop to f3, just trying to cling onto that pawn and make things a bit harder for Fischer to get things done on the king side. But instead, rook to f3 was played. Fischer just continued rook to h6, now pressuring that very weak g-pawn, of course, or h-pawn, sorry. Korchnoi decides to advance it with a bit of pressure on the knight. Of course, the knight is not threatened to be captured because there's currently a pin here, and Fischer gets more of his pieces into the attack. Knight to g6, and this knight is ready to just march in and cause absolute havoc on the king side. So Korchnoi decides to go king to g1, sidestepping that pin, and now this knight is attacked, so he has to rotate that back. Knight f6, of course. And again, I mean, what is white even going to do here? There's nothing even, like, I couldn't even be able to find the move for white if I tried. Korchnoi decides to go for bishop to e1. Again, this idea, trying to get a bishop, just aiming at a few key dark squares on the king side, but doesn't really matter at all. Fischer goes knight to h8, an absolutely ridiculous looking move. But the idea is, with the position being so closed and white not having anything to do, he can just rotate his knight to the most ideal square on g5. That's exactly what he does. Knight to f7, knight to g5, and now these knights are just absolutely monstrous. Black's almost got every single one of his pieces attacking the white king, apart from this bishop and this rook. Korchnoi decides to go queen to e2, moving his queen, just touching that g-pawn, making sure it's just defended. And Fischer goes rook to g6, again, pressuring that g-pawn, which is now even weaker because it can't even be defended by its sister h-pawn. And then Korchnoi goes king to f1, trying to run the king away. Fischer, finally, all the preparations have been made, it's time to break through. Knight takes h3, the best move, just to sacrifice a full knight to get this rook in the game, and the queen's going to be joining the party, and it's just bad news for white. So captures, recaptures with the bishop with check, king has to move. If you'd want to block, you're going to end up in even a worse position. So Korchnoi decides to go king to f2. He noted at this moment, his hand hovered over the white pawn in e4. Usually in King's Indians you can also sacrifice this knight here, but he realized if you want to capture here, you just have queen takes d4 check, which he says white is winning. The engine seems to think this is a draw, which is quite interesting, but after sacrificing so much material, it's hard to see how black's got any compensation anymore. So thank God Fischer did not go for that. He decided to go for knight g4 check. Korchnoi does not want to move his king, so captures. And then apparently at this moment, Korchnoi thought for a minute and a half, and not seeing a defensive double threat of bishop takes e2 check, bishop takes to e2 and queen to h4 check, resigned the game. He resigned because, again, you can't stop both these threats. The engine gives a line where you want to sacrifice your queen, and you want to know what the top 3 lines are for white. The best move is queen takes g4, the second best move is king to f1, giving up the queen, and the third best move is queen to f3. So absolutely ridiculous stuff. If you want to try and cling on, I'm not even sure what you're going to even do. Queen to f1, I guess, keeping the queen a little bit over towards the king side, but then simply queen h4 check, king g2, bishop to d1 check, and you see bishop to g3, rook takes g3 check, rook takes g3, queen takes g3 defended by the pawn, king to h1, and bishop to f3 check. And since this is basically checkmate, white has to give up the queen, so captures. King is hit, knight is hit, and it's absolutely grim for white. So beautiful attacking chess by Fischer against the normally more positional d4 play of the Russians. So if you like that video and want to see more like it, it'd help me out if you could subscribe. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers before the end of the month. There's going to be another video popping up now that YouTube's algorithm thinks you're going to enjoy the most, so probably good to give that one a watch as well. So hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one.